Furtive whispers rustled across the vast, sun-drenched quad. Aiden was here. Wasn't he missing? Yeah, how did some wild aberration not tear him apart? He was found, apparently, fell into a ravine and was knocked out for days. Humph. Figures for a power null like him. The boy at the center of the storm stood alone at the edge of the crowd. A solitary figure, an unintentional vacuum of empty space carved out around him by the other students. He seemed entirely oblivious to the gossip that swirled like dust motes in the air. His dense, dark lashes were lowered, casting shadows on his cheeks. His face, fair to the point of translucence, was devoid of expression, as if his mind were miles away. He possessed an aura of detachment, a delicate quality that set him apart from the bustling world around him. A resonant voice boomed from a platform not far away, announcing that student number 2087, Aiden Crestwood, was to come forward. The 2087 students gathered for the assessment were ranked according to their latent power levels. Being last on the list was a public declaration of his near-non-existent arcane signature. Ordinarily, someone like him would never qualify for admission to the academy. The prevailing rumor was that the Crestwood family had funded an entire new research wing to force his name onto the candidate roster. This was his third and final year of eligibility for the assessment. If he still showed no measurable power, no amount of family money could keep him on the list. His chance to enroll would be permanently revoked. At the sound of his name, the boy's lashes trembled and he lifted his gaze. He paused for a fraction of a second before starting his walk toward the testing facility. A hush fell over the quad. Countless eyes followed his solitary journey. They held little kindness, brimming mostly with ridicule and a hungry anticipation for his public failure. Aiden stepped into the designated room. The proctor supervising the power assessment was a man worn down by monotony. He looked up with weary disinterest, his gaze sweeping over Aiden. He assumed the boy knew the routine by now and gestured vaguely toward the equipment, telling him to get on with it. But Aiden remained stationary. He cast a curious glance at the bizarrely shaped apparatus before turning to the proctor. He inquired with genuine sincerity where he was supposed to go. The proctor's expression soured. He thought it was a pathetic act, given this wasn't Aiden's first attempt. But considering it would be the last time he'd have to deal with him, he patiently pointed to a dim silver orb on the machine, instructing him to place his hand on it. Aiden nodded, acknowledging the instruction with a quiet affirmation. He stepped forward and rested his hand on the sphere. He then drew a deep breath and averted his eyes, as if unable to watch the inevitable outcome. Seeing this, even the proctor, who was certain of the result, felt a flicker of sympathy. To be the sole heir of a rapidly ascending family, yet possess no power, was surely a burden greater than anyone could imagine. It was no wonder he seemed so invested in this final, desperate test. Just then, a peculiar sound pierced the silence. A piercing electronic shriek, shrill and insistent, jolted the proctor from his thoughts. Startled, he whipped his head toward the source of the noise. The hemispherical device was now blazing with an intense light, so bright it hurt to look at. On an adjacent display, a needle was thrashing wildly across the dial, never settling on a number. The strident alarm bled through the walls of the room. Outside, the students exchanged bewildered glances, their faces mirroring the same shocked uncertainty. No one knew what was happening inside. The proctor, his eyes wide with disbelief, shot up from his chair, demanding to know what was going on. Aiden, equally startled by the sudden chaos, instinctively snatched his hand back. The sound stopped instantly. The light dimmed. The proctor rushed over to inspect the machine. He could find nothing wrong with it. His mind raced. He wondered if it had been tampered with and shot a sharp, suspicious look at Aiden. The boy simply stared back, his expression a mask of pure innocence, as if he were a mere bystander to the event. The proctor quickly dismissed the possibility of sabotage. As wealthy as the Crestwood family was, they didn't have the influence to manipulate the Academy's entrance exams. And Aiden himself was out of the question. It was common knowledge that he was a dud, a 0 on the power scale. He couldn't possibly have manipulated the equipment right under a proctor's nose. Suppressing his confusion, the proctor pulled out a backup device. He told Aiden to try again with this one. Aiden once more acknowledged the order and placed his hand on the new machine. An even louder, more deafening mechanical scream erupted, a sound sharp enough to rupture eardrums. The moment Aiden removed his hand, it ceased. The proctor was completely baffled. This kind of overload alarm should only trigger if a subject's power level drastically exceeded the machine's maximum threshold. While this model wasn't the most advanced, it was more than sufficient for screening new students, especially the notoriously powerless Aiden Crestwood. After several more failed attempts, the proctor's ears were ringing. Aiden held up his hand innocently and asked a question. The proctor, his brow furrowed with unconcealed irritation, demanded to know what he wanted. Aiden pointed to the silent machine and asked with a guileless expression if perhaps it was just poorly made. The man's temper flared. After a long, tense standoff, Aiden blinked, a slow dawning of realization on his face. He recalled something about the machine lighting up being the sign of a pass, and so he asked if that meant he had passed. The proctor looked flustered, sweat beading on his forehead. His earlier indifference was gone, replaced by utter bafflement. He stammered for a moment before telling Aiden to go home and that someone would contact him with the results. Aiden nodded with a simple okay. As he turned to leave, a thunderous shout erupted behind him, ordering him to wait. Before Aiden could process what was happening, his hand was seized in a vice-like grip. In that split second, his dark pupils contracted into narrow, vertical slits. A searing, ember-red glow burned silently in their depths, hinting at something inhuman, ancient, and unnerving. He blinked, and the moment passed. He turned to look at the proctor clutching his hand, his face a picture of mild confusion. The proctor was examining the boy's hand with frantic intensity, his nose nearly touching Aiden's palm as if he could dissect every line and crease with his gaze alone. 3 minutes passed. He found nothing. Frustrated, he looked up, his voice sharp and accusatory. He demanded to know what trick Aiden had used, insisting he must have cheated. Aiden's expression shifted to one of slight discomfort. The proctor, sensing he had struck a nerve, pressed his advantage. He demanded to know why Aiden had looked away during the test. Aiden's gaze flickered away for a moment. After a few seconds of silence, he mumbled that it was because they were too ugly. The proctor froze, asking him to repeat himself. Aiden stated plainly that he thought his hands were ugly. The proctor instinctively glanced down. The boy's fingers were slightly curled. They were long and elegant, with slender tips and smooth skin, the nails neatly trimmed and healthy. Faint red marks from the proctor's forceful grip were still visible on the back of his hand. From any angle, it was a beautiful hand. He couldn't fathom such a bizarre excuse. Ultimately, with no evidence of foul play, Aiden was allowed to leave. He stood at the exit, looking down at his own hand. For a human, the fingers were quite lovely. He slowly flexed them, opening and closing his fist. Yes, they were definitely his. A wave of melancholy washed over him. So ugly, truly hideous. A proper claw should be covered in hard, obsidian scales, with talons sharp enough to shatter mountains, not this soft, pale, vulnerable flesh that looked as if a splinter could pierce it. The thought made him look away in disgust. He yearned for his true, magnificent body, his immense, dark tail, and most of all, his cavern full of treasure. Aiden sighed. 50,000 years ago, bored beyond measure, he had fallen asleep on his pile of treasure. When he next opened his eyes, he was not only trapped in this weak, unfamiliar human form, but his entire hoard had vanished. All those millennia of careful hoarding, gone overnight. His body and his treasure were gone. To understand what had happened, he had followed the search party of humans that found him back to the Crestwood estate. They watched him like a hawk, terrified he would disappear again, effectively trapping him in human society. He was forced to continue playing the part of this body's previous owner, which included being sent here today to touch this ridiculous glowing ball. It was all so irritating. Lost in thought, Aiden walked out of the building and toward the edge of the quad. The students watched him with varying expressions, their eyes fixed on him. They hadn't seen what happened, but they had all heard the piercing alarm. A select few knew what that alarm signified, a power level far exceeding the equipment's limits. But for Aiden Crestwood? Impossible. The machine must have malfunctioned. Aiden was completely unaware of the scrutiny. He moved with a natural grace, as if accustomed to being the center of attention, leaving the entire assembly of students behind him. His face was impassive, but the thought of dinner waiting for him at home brought a flicker of genuine joy to his heart. He wasn't fond of humans, but their food, that was truly irresistible. Outside the main gates, a car was waiting. The moment Aiden settled into the back seat, the old butler's eager gaze met his in the rearview mirror, asking how it went. His eyes were bright with desperate hope. Aiden considered the question for a moment, then reported that the ball had lit up. The butler, Jeeves, first stared in confusion. Then his entire body went rigid with disbelief, as if he couldn't trust his own ears. Aiden asked if he was all right. In the months since his return, Aiden had pieced together most of the story of this human identity. The boy named Aiden Crestwood had been distant from his family. Even after being found, he had never met any of his supposed relatives. He was cared for solely by this old butler, the same man who brought him all sorts of delicious food every day. For that reason, Aiden was willing to show him a measure of kindness. Aiden's voice seemed to snap Jeeves out of his stupor. The reality of what Aiden had said finally sank in. Tears welled in the old man's eyes, and he began to speak, his words tumbling out in a rush of emotion. He exclaimed that it was wonderful, that his father would be so pleased, and that he would tell him at once. Jeeves, overcome with joy, rambled on, recounting that Mr. Crestwood had said if Aiden passed the test, he would be reconsidered as an heir. He added that, as was customary, an initiation gala would be held in his honor. A gala? Food. And it would be a very grand affair. Lots and lots of food. Aiden's eyes lit up. He nodded obediently, agreeing that sounded good. Jeeves glanced in the rearview mirror. The boy was sitting perfectly straight in the back seat. Though his expression remained neutral, an unmistakable aura of happiness radiated from him. Jeeves secretly wiped away another tear. Such a good, sensible boy. The date for the gala was set much sooner than expected. Invitations were dispatched, and news spread quickly among the city's elite. The Crestwood family would be hosting an initiation celebration at their main residence. In a hallway of the grand estate, the boy tugged uncomfortably at the collar of his formal suit. Jeeves, walking beside him, paused to straighten his bow tie. Aiden gestured to his attire, asking if he really had to wear this. The light from the ballroom down the hall spilled over them, casting a cool, polished sheen on his profile. He frowned slightly, his dark lashes casting long shadows. He looked almost unreal in his perfection. Jeeves assured him that of course he did. He smoothed the lapels of Aiden's jacket, beaming with affection, telling him how handsome he looked. Aiden muttered that it wasn't handsome at all. His eyes then lit up with an idea, and he looked up expectantly, beginning to make a suggestion. But before he could finish, Jeeves cut him off with the sternness of a drill sergeant, telling him not to even think about it. The memory of the handsome outfit Aiden had chosen for himself, a creation covered in shimmering gold sequins and clanking metallic charms that was blindingly garish, made Jeeves's face pale slightly. It was a singular display of dreadful taste. Met with such a firm refusal, Aiden's face fell with disappointment. He murmured a quiet "oh," his long, thick lashes fluttering like the wings of a small, dark bird. Jeeves's heart softened. Such a sweet child. Perfect in every way except for his atrocious sense of style. He adjusted the shoulders of Aiden's suit and brushed off a speck of dust, his heart a mixture of pride and a touch of sadness. He informed the young master that after tonight, he would likely be moving back into the main house. Although this was nominally Aiden's home, he had been living in a small villa set far apart from the main residence. But now that he had passed the academy's assessment, he had presumably earned the right to return. Aiden's eyes brightened. He asked if that meant he could wear. Jeeves's brow twitched. He interrupted through gritted teeth, saying absolutely not. A footman waiting by the ballroom doors saw them approach and pulled open the massive double doors. A wave of brilliant light and boisterous sound washed over them. Arthur Crestwood, the human Aiden's father, stood in the center of the room, speaking quietly to another young man. Jeeves gave Aiden an encouraging nudge, urging him forward. Just then, Arthur picked up a champagne flute. He tapped its side with a small silver spoon, the clear, ringing sound silencing the crowd. All heads turned toward him in anticipation. Arthur cleared his throat and announced that tonight was a celebration for his son's official admission to the academy. He placed a hand on the shoulder of the young man beside him, a rare smile gracing his usually stern face. He declared that Ryan had passed his initial assessment with a B-rank power level, placing him in the top 5 of the incoming class. Jeeves froze, scarcely able to believe what he was hearing. He had been so wrong. A gala was indeed being held, but its guest of honor was not Aiden. Everyone knew Aiden was the sole legitimate heir of the Crestwood family. Ryan could only be an illegitimate son. For his father to present him so prominently before society sent a clear and unmistakable message. He was being groomed to replace Aiden as the family heir. After a brief, stunned silence, the room erupted in applause and congratulations. Everyone tactfully offered their blessings and praise for Ryan, carefully avoiding any mention of the boy who was once the sole heir, as if his existence had been collectively erased. Amid the clamor, Jeeves instinctively looked for Aiden. His mind was a jumble of confusion and outrage, unable to form any words of comfort. To his surprise, Aiden seemed completely unfazed, his attention fixed not on the public betrayal, but on a dim corner of the ballroom. A thoughtful expression crossed his face as he watched something unfold in the shadows. Jeeves followed his gaze. In the corner, obscured by shadows, a guest was slumped against the wall, head bowed, unnaturally still amidst the lively celebration. A waiter, noticing the oddity, approached with a tray and seemed to be quietly inquiring after the guest's well-being. The scene was deceptively peaceful, yet an undercurrent of unease rippled through the air. Without, The guest's arm twitched violently. His skin split open, but it was not blood that seeped out. It was a viscous, amber-colored fluid. A loud crash shattered the festive atmosphere as the waiter's tray hit the floor. A blood-curdling scream tore through the night. The guest's body, once full and robust, collapsed like a deflated balloon. From the wounds, a torrent of fist-sized, black insects poured forth. A living tide of clicking, chitinous bodies that swarmed across the carpet. Aberrations. It was impossible. How could they be here? Panic erupted. Screams echoed through the hall as the terrified crowd surged toward the exits. Cries for order were swallowed by the wave of chaos. Arthur, his face a mask of fury, shielded Ryan as they retreated, shouting commands that were lost in the pandemonium. A few power users fought against the tide of people trying to contain the outbreak. A chandelier exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the room into darkness and triggering a fresh wave of terrified shrieks. In the crush of bodies, Jeeves lost sight of Aiden. He screamed his young master's name, his voice filled with terror. There was no reply. Amid the frantic, fleeing crowd, one figure stood motionless, a calm island in a sea of hysteria. Aiden did not move, did not flinch. His expression was placid, his pale face a blank slate, as if all emotion had been leached from it. His eyes were narrowed, dark as the abyss. With an ear-splitting screech, one of the fist-sized aberrations charged at him. Its 6 small eyes gleamed with a vicious, greedy light. Its sharp mandibles clicked, anticipating the pleasure of tearing apart the fragile human before it. But the next second it froze. An ancient, primal aura emanated from the human. The aberration grew cautious. It reared back, sniffing the air. The boy before it was, from flesh to bone, 100% human, exuding the tempting aroma of blood and life. But the soul, the true seat of his power, was something else entirely. A vast, invisible shadow clung to him, projecting a cold, terrifying pressure, like a glimpse into the deepest void. An instinctual fear stirred in the creature's core. Aiden lowered his gaze. Beneath his long lashes, a flicker of crimson moved within his dark pupils. Though his expression remained serene, the aberration could feel it. He was in a very bad mood. The creature shuddered and, without hesitation, turned to flee. Aiden was, in fact, extremely displeased. All dragons are fiercely territorial creatures, possessive and arrogant, inherently distrustful of any other aberration. Abyssal dragons, in particular, were the worst of their kind. Though he was currently without his draconic form, that did not mean he would tolerate these filthy, low-level creatures. They had dared to invade his territory without his permission and turn it into a slaughterhouse. It was a profound insult. In the swirling chaos, the boy's slender frame seemed as if it could be swallowed by the darkness at any moment. Soft, innocent, vulnerable. Yet he moved forward with steady, deliberate steps. A heavy, oppressive aura radiated from him, carrying a faint, scorching heat like that of smoldering embers. Like a flood encountering a bedrock cliff, the aberration scrambled to get out of his way, parting around him and leaving a clear path in their wake. To ignore the presence of a dragon was to invite its wrath. The Department of Anomaly Control arrived swiftly. The team was led by a tall woman in tactical gear, her dark skin and pulled-back hair giving her a no-nonsense air. She questioned how an aberration could have infiltrated a high-security residential area like the Crestwood District. One of her team members behind her speculated that this was no ordinary creature. Vera stared at the dark, oppressive silence of the ballroom, from which the faint, repulsive sound of thousands of insects crawling could be heard. She made a quick decision, ordering her subordinate to contact Director Morgan immediately. She reported that an abyssal species was suspected to have appeared in the heights. The mention of the abyss sent a chill through the team. In the modern age, humanity had mapped nearly the entire continent, save for one location: the abyss. It was a bottomless chasm shrouded in toxic fog and perpetual darkness, a place from which no explorer had ever returned alive. The creatures that lived there were a mystery. If an abyssal aberration had truly manifested in a major urban center, the implications were catastrophic. The team member, understanding the gravity of the situation, acknowledged the order at once. Just then, an old man in a butler's uniform rushed forward with reckless abandon, breaking through the perimeter to plead with Vera. He begged her to save his young master, who was still inside. Arthur, his hair and clothes disheveled but his dignity precariously intact, angrily ordered his staff to drag the man back, calling him a disgrace. Several Crestwood servants complied, pulling the weeping Jeeves away. Vera's gaze lingered on him for a moment before she hardened her resolve and gave the order to move in. When asked if they should wait for Director Morgan, she shook her head grimly. There wasn't time. Rescuing the hostage was the priority. Aiden soon reached the epicenter of the outbreak. The guest's body lay on the floor, its jaw grotesquely unhinged. Its desiccated skin stretched taut over its bones in a silent scream. Its abdomen was ripped open, a continuous stream of aberrations still emerging from the cavity. Aiden knelt. He peeled back the dry tissue of the man's torso, revealing the gaping hole. There were no organs inside. Instead, a dense network of fine, blood-red filaments, like a grotesque web of capillaries, coated the man's ribcage, filling his entire chest cavity. Deep within this web was a single insect, no bigger than a fingernail. It looked identical to the others, only much smaller. Its black carapace shone with a cold, metallic luster. Where its head should have been was a hideous, distorted caricature of a human face. Sensing danger, the face twisted into a mask of terror and rage, emitting a high-pitched shriek. The red filaments vibrated, and the surrounding aberrations, as if receiving a command, began to converge on the body. But Aiden's presence held them at bay. They milled about restlessly a few feet away, their clicking a chorus of agitated fear. Aiden leaned closer, then paused. A faint, insidious aura emanated from the corpse's chest. It was cold and dark, a tangible presence that silently seeped into the surrounding air. As he drew nearer, the sensation grew stronger, clearer, impossible to ignore. The boy took a deep breath, his eyes closing in apparent bliss. For a fleeting instant, his pupils narrowed into thin, vertical slits, a flash of incandescent red passing through them. Felt good. In that moment of darkness, a strange sensation bloomed from the depths of his soul. His fingertips, his spine, the base of his tailbone. They all tingled with a phantom itch, as if something were trying to burst forth from his fragile human shell. Not an illusion of power, but real scales, claws, and wings, straining to grow from his very flesh and bone. Could this thing help him recover his true form? Aiden's eyes snapped open. He regarded the tiny insect with newfound wonder. He had changed his mind. He reached out. A phantom image of black dragon scales flickered over his pale, soft fingers. His nails, for a moment, appeared sharp and deadly. He swiped through the air. The red filaments tore apart. In the distance, the swarm of aberrations collapsed as if their strings had been cut. The remaining few scattered in a blind panic. The small mother bug, now helpless, was scooped into Aiden's hand. Its human-like face contorted in fear as it squirmed, its 6 legs kicking wildly. It was somewhat annoying, Aiden rubbed his thumb and forefinger together, a predatory gesture. The small bug froze, sensing the immense danger. He resisted the urge to crush it and instead pricked his own fingertip, squeezing out a single drop of blood. The tiny bead trembled on his pale skin, a perfect, ruby-red gem glowing in the darkness. It was beautiful and deadly. The bug tried to scrabble away, but Aiden held it fast, pressing the drop of blood toward it. Left with no choice, it tearfully consumed the offering. The instant the blood was gone, its legs kicked once, and it went limp in his palm, inert as a polished stone. At that exact moment, every last aberration in the ballroom fell dead. The sickening sound of their crawling ceased. The silence was eerie. Satisfied, Aiden tucked the bug into his pocket. Just then, the beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness from the entrance, followed by footsteps and the relieved sobs of rescued survivors. Vera stood in the doorway, momentarily stunned. She had not expected to find a survivor standing calmly in the very heart of the infestation. The figure turned toward the light. He was a boy with fair skin and a slender, still-growing frame. His hair was a soft, golden brown. He squinted, unaccustomed to the sudden brightness. The hall reeked of blood and viscera, a nightmarish landscape littered with the dense carpet of insect corpses. The cold, dark, and treacherous atmosphere of the room clung to everything. He seemed utterly out of place, and completely unharmed. Vera tightened her grip on her flashlight and called out, her voice loud in the silence, asking if he was all right. Aiden nodded, looking endearingly vulnerable. He unconsciously narrowed his eyes, and a fleeting smile of deep satisfaction, quick as a flash of light, crossed his lips. He couldn't be better. 20 minutes later, Aiden was huddled on the curb outside, wrapped in a thick blanket and clutching a cup of hot chocolate, only the top of his fluffy head visible. Jeeves was fussing over him, his voice a low, worried murmur. Aiden, his attention elsewhere, occasionally gave a non-committal response. A pair of polished shoes appeared in his line of sight. A cold, emotionless voice stated that since Aiden was here, the speaker wouldn't have to repeat himself. Aiden looked up from his cup. Arthur Crestwood continued, acknowledging that he had heard Aiden pass the assessment, which he called not bad. He then swiftly changed the subject, his tone taking on a menacing edge. He informed Aiden that his brother, Ryan, would be starting at the academy with him and that Aiden was expected to look out for him. He was not to compete, but to know his place. He asked if that was understood. Jeeves clenched his fists, his breath catching in his throat. He couldn't believe his employer's coldness, that the first thing he would do after his own son had narrowly escaped death was to threaten him on behalf of an illegitimate child. Aiden took a moment to process the words, then let out a slow "oh." He thought for a second, then asked with genuine confusion who the man was. A vein throbbed in Arthur's temple. His voice was laced with fury as he began to berate Aiden, telling him not to think he could get away with. Vera's voice cut him off, apologizing for the interruption. Arthur's rage was dammed up mid-flow. He turned, his face a thunderous mask, and then he saw the man standing behind Vera. In that instant, Arthur felt the blood freeze in his veins. He took an involuntary step back. Vera respectfully addressed the man as director, then stepped aside, indicating Aiden. She explained that this was the hostage they had found closest to the source. The man was tall and powerfully built, exuding an aura as sharp and cold as a honed blade. His skin was exceptionally pale, and his long silver hair was tied back, cascading down his back like liquid moonlight. Morgan dropped his gaze. Beneath his silver lashes, his eyes were the color of cold steel. His frigid look swept over Arthur and Aiden. He spoke Aiden's name, his voice as cool and remote as his appearance, low and resonant with a metallic quality. Aiden looked up at him and his eyes widened. His draconic instincts took over completely. His mind filled with a single, overwhelming thought. Shiny. He didn't answer Morgan's implicit question. The thick blanket enveloped him, making him look small and fragile. Steam from the hot chocolate rose, casting a faint blush on his face. He just stared, his mind seemingly blank. Arthur, struggling to contain his fury, forced a hideous smile. He snapped at Aiden, telling him that Director Morgan was speaking to him. Aiden, still lost in his daze, turned to his father with a questioning sound. It was clear the boy hadn't heard a word he'd said. Arthur's face contorted with rage, but with Morgan present, he restrained himself. Morgan seemed unbothered by Aiden's distraction. His gaze, sharp as a blade and reflecting the cold, distant light of the sky, remained fixed on the boy, a deep, probing look in his steel blue eyes. After several seconds, he looked away, turning to Vera and asking if the scan had been done. Vera started, admitting that it had not yet been performed. Some aberrations could mimic human form or parasitize a host, so in theory, anyone in close contact with them required a scan for safety. But such creatures were so rare that the protocol was often overlooked. She asked nervously if she should request the equipment. Morgan told her it wasn't necessary. He took a step forward and looked down at Aiden, commanding him to give him his hand. The beautiful, shining thing was speaking to him. Aiden dazedly extended his hand. Morgan caught his slender wrist. He wore black tactical gloves, and the cold, rough leather was an abrasive shock against Aiden's skin. Aiden flinched, trying to pull back, but Morgan's grip was like iron. With a soft click, a small silver bracelet was fastened around his wrist. Aiden snapped back to reality. He looked down at the bracelet. It encircled his fine wrist bone, its polished silver gleaming against his pale skin. Intricate patterns shifted across its surface, mesmerizingly beautiful in the dim light. His eyes lit up. Soon, the patterns stopped moving, settling into a fixed design. Morgan frowned. His silver blue eyes, shielded by his long white lashes, were focused intently on the bracelet's surface, his expression puzzled. Aiden was also staring at it, blinking. He didn't understand what it meant. The heavy silence stretched on. Finally, Morgan looked up, his gaze deep and searching as he studied Aiden for a long moment before announcing that it was done. He pressed a release on the bracelet, and with another click, it opened. Vera let out a quiet, relieved sigh. It was the first time she had seen Morgan use that particular device. It was a sign of extreme potential danger, and she was glad everything seemed normal. Aiden's eyes followed the bracelet as Morgan removed it. He asked with undisguised reluctance if he was taking it back. Morgan paused. He saw the blatant disappointment on the boy's face and asked what else he would do. Aiden's expression drooped as he asked if he couldn't have it. Arthur's face contorted. He hissed through clenched teeth that Aiden had no idea what he was saying. He explained that those diagnostic bracelets were incredibly expensive, custom-made for high-ranking DAC officials, and certainly not given away as gifts. Aiden responded with a dejected "oh." He looked up at the man before him. Morgan had been silent, watching him with a thoughtful, appraising gaze. The silver blue of his eyes held a glacial sharpness beneath their stunning surface. The bracelet, which had seemed so brilliant on Aiden's wrist, now looked dull in Morgan's hand. Aiden considered this, then asked about Morgan himself. He inquired if he was also very expensive. A collective gasp went through the onlookers. Arthur looked as if he was about to have an aneurysm. He asked if Morgan was trying to buy him. Morgan ignored everyone else, his attention solely on the boy. Vera's face was a mask of horrified disbelief. Aiden began to say that actually, just the hair would be fine. Arthur lunged forward, frantically trying to explain to Morgan that he shouldn't take it seriously, that the boy was still in shock and not thinking clearly. At that moment, Jeeves, recovering from his own state of shock, yanked the blanket up, completely covering Aiden's face. Aiden stared blankly at the wool in front of him, deeply confused by the sudden turn of events. Arthur stammered out another apology. Just then, a field agent ran up to Morgan with a report, handing him a file. Morgan took it and flipped through a few pages. He looked from the file to the boy, now completely swaddled in the blanket, then glanced at Arthur, cutting off his rambling excuses with a curt dismissal, telling him not to worry about it. With that, he closed the file and walked back toward the chaotic scene of the ballroom. On the way home, Aiden paid little attention to Jeeves's heartfelt but incessant stream of and advice. He couldn't understand what he had done wrong. Had humans stopped liking money? They had been so obsessed with it 50,000 years ago. If he weren't still trapped without his full strength and body, he wouldn't have to buy things. He would just take them. After finally placating the butler, Aiden returned to his room. He closed the door, shutting out the light from the hallway. He then took a deep breath, backed up, and took a running leap. He landed with a satisfying clatter on his bed, rolling around happily. Where soft bedding should have been was a massive pile of gleaming gold and silver objects. Cutlery, ornaments pried from furniture, decorative fixtures from the walls. They shifted and chimed as he moved. Aiden closed his eyes in bliss, burrowing into his hoard. These were the treasures he had painstakingly collected from the villa since becoming Aiden. It had taken him a long time to gather enough to make a proper sleeping nest. Unfortunately, his new human body was pathetically fragile. He couldn't maintain a constant output of power to protect himself, so he often woke up covered in bruises from his lumpy bed. After rolling around for a while, he finally remembered why he was here. He sat up and pulled the small, face-like bug from his pocket. He poked its belly. One of its legs twitched, but it remained on its back, playing dead with great conviction. A small flicker of draconic flame ignited on Aiden's fingertip. The bug stopped playing dead. It leaped up with a terrified screech. Aiden smiled pleasantly and leaned in close, asking if it was awake now. The bug shrieked for him to stay away. The Department of Anomaly Control was housed in a tall, imposing gray tower in the center of the heights. The moment Morgan entered the building, a researcher in a white lab coat came sprinting toward him, out of breath. He addressed him as director. Morgan turned, his calm eyes silently questioning the man's frantic state. The researcher gasped that Julian had told him to get Morgan the second he returned, that it was extremely important. Morgan nodded thoughtfully and headed toward the research division. Julian was already there, waiting. As the head of the research department, he was responsible for studying aberration weaknesses and monitoring unusual power fluctuations. His usually flippant expression was taut, but his eyes were shining with an almost manic excitement. He explained that the analysis of the recent massive power surge had just come in. He took a deep breath and said slowly that it might be, just possibly, an ethereal. Morgan froze. Ethereals, the so-called fantasy species, once stood at the apex of all life. They were powerful, terrifying beings with intelligence and lifespans that far surpassed humans, and they had once ruled the entire continent. But they had vanished over 10,000 years ago. Though rumors of their return surfaced from time to time, they were never more than that, rumors. No one living had ever seen one. And Julian was a die-hard enthusiast of ethereal research. He leaned in conspiratorially, whispering that it could even be a dragon. Morgan's head snapped up. His silver-blue eyes turned a hard, steely gray, a dark fire burning beneath a layer of ice. His focus absolute as he repeated the word. Julian flinched and held up his hands in surrender, telling him not to look at him like that it was just a joke. He added that the data was only a possibility, and the chances of it being a legendary creature like a dragon were virtually zero. He had just been required to report it. He gave Morgan a wink, adding that even if one did show up, it wouldn't be a problem with him around. Morgan was the strongest power user alive, the youngest director in the Dax history, and the last scion of a noble dragon-slaying bloodline. Seeing the man's expression darken, Julian coughed and quickly changed the subject, asking about the mission in the Crestwood district and if there were any casualties. Morgan stared at him for a long moment before finally taking pity on him. He reported that there were none. Julian then asked about the aberration sample and if it had been sent to the lab. Morgan's eyes narrowed slightly. He stated that it had escaped. Julian was shocked, unable to believe that any creature could escape from him. Morgan shot him a look that silenced any further questions on that topic. Julian cleared his throat and asked if the residual power analysis had come back. Morgan said it hadn't, but that, in his judgment, it was an abyssal species. Julian was surprised but didn't question Morgan's assessment. His senses had never been wrong. Morgan's eyes narrowed further. He remarked that abyssal species were appearing far too frequently. He tapped a finger on the table, telling Julian to put his fanciful ethereals aside for now. The movements in the abyss were a more urgent matter. Muttering that ethereals were not fanciful, Julian reluctantly turned to begin the new research. He had only taken a few steps when Morgan called for him to wait. Julian turned back, confused. Morgan frowned, and after a long pause, he asked if Julian was certain there were no problems with the design of his portable bioscanner. Julian looked deeply insulted. He insisted it was one of his proudest creations and that it was absolutely impossible for it to be flawed. Morgan simply nodded, saying he understood, and turned to leave. Julian sensed something was off and called out, asking what had happened. Morgan didn't answer, walking away with his gaze lowered, his silver lashes casting shadows that made his expression unreadable. He had only one thought. For the first time, his intuition might have failed him. The small aberration trembled in the corner, staring in terror at the human before it. He looked ordinary, with the same limbs and features as any other human. He even smelled like one. But its gaze shifted to the flame dancing on Aiden's fingertip. The crimson fire leaped and burned silently in the darkness, radiating an oppressive, terrifying heat that promised utter annihilation. A single glance made it shudder. It was certain its own tough carapace could withstand most human attacks, but its instincts screamed that this fire would burn it to ash. Absolutely. Yet this ordinary-looking boy was toying with it as if it were a harmless ball of light, shaping it between his fingers. The facebug stammered, asking what he was. Aiden just blinked. Just then, moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the room. The light caught the boy's face, glinting in his now crimson, vertically slitted pupils. It was a cruel alien sight. He raised his hand, and a layer of hard, sharp scales shimmered into existence over his fingertips, reflecting the light with a cold, metallic sheen. Aiden smiled and said he was a dragon. The bug stared dumbly at the boy's reptilian eyes and scaled claws. Then its 6 legs gave out and it fainted again. It was awoken by a searing heat. Its feet were burning. Its carapace was sizzling. It shrieked in terror, kicking its legs wildly. A slightly impatient human voice told it to be quiet. A moment later, an immense pressure descended, choking off the bug's screams. It hung in mid-air, staring at the human. The terrifying flame danced just inches away, radiating immense heat. Yet it wasn't being burned. Seeing that the bug had finally quieted down, Aiden extinguished the dragon flame. He looked human again, save for the faint, ember-like glow that lingered deep in his pupils. The memories flooded back. The eyes, the scales, the fire. Dragon. The bug shrieked hysterically that all the dragons were dead, that there were no more ethereals left on the continent. Aiden tilted his head, confused. He pointed out that he wasn't dead. The bug was speechless. 20 minutes later, Aiden had been brought up to speed on the current state of the world. After a long silence, he asked in disbelief if there were really no elves. None. Merfolk? Ghouls? None of them either. Aiden was shocked. He couldn't believe that after all this time, only the weakest species, humans, had survived. He demanded to know how that could have happened. The bug replied timidly that it didn't know. It hadn't been alive that long. It was beginning to believe this creature truly was a dragon from an ancient era. It asked hesitantly if he really was a dragon. Aiden shot it an irritable glance. The bug trembled and quickly rephrased, insisting it wasn't questioning his identity, but asking why he looked the way he did now. Inside and out, from his blood to his skin, he was unmistakably human. Even for a powerful ethereal, the disguise was unervingly perfect. This reminded Aiden why he had brought the bug back in the first place. He explained that back at the gala, he had smelled a certain aroma. He held the squirming bug and examined it closely, then frowned, saying the smell was gone now. The bug, confused, stopped struggling. It asked if he meant this. The familiar, dark energy of the abyss began to fill the air. Aiden's eyes lit up. He confirmed that was it and asked what it was. The bug replied numbly that it was a toxin. The bottom of the abyss was filled with poisonous air, which made the species living there more aggressive and powerful. Abyssal creatures would instinctively alter the atmosphere around them when they attacked. For the native species of the continent, this toxin was lethal. In theory, dragons were no exception. A glimmer of hope sparked in the bug's mind. This could be its chance to strike back. It flapped its wings, working harder to poison the air. The boy's grip loosened for a second, but then tightened again. Aiden stared at the bug with shining eyes and, without an ounce of pity, shook it, telling it to keep going. The bug was dumbfounded. It was dizzy from the shaking, and a sense of dread washed over it. It cautiously asked what kind of dragon he was. A fire drake, maybe? Agile and slender? Or a black dragon? Majestic and powerful? Aiden grinned, showing his teeth. He was an abyssal dragon. Savage, cruel, and unpredictable. Even in the ancient era, they were the most powerful and feared of all dragonkind. Most importantly, they were born and raised in the abyss, making them apex predators on either side of the continent. The bug's hope of rebellion died instantly. It obediently told Aiden everything it knew. After his long slumber, Aiden was finally learning about the changes to the world. The abyss and the surface were two sides of the same continent. In his time, any sufficiently powerful being could travel between them. But after the ethereals disappeared, the abyss had been sealed. Only occasionally would small rifts appear, but the toxin couldn't escape, only the abyssal creatures themselves. On the surface, humans had built a civilization of power and technology, becoming the dominant species. Their conflict with other aberrations had escalated to a breaking point. None of this was of much interest to Aiden. The things he did care about, his body, his treasure, remained a mystery. This bug was too weak to know anything about them, and the amount of toxin it could produce was negligible, not nearly enough to replicate the sensation he had felt at the gala. His body remained stubbornly human. Aiden sighed in disappointment, declaring the bug useless. Before it could react, a flame ignited before its eyes. The bug shrieked for him to wait. Aiden paused, his tone deceptively pleasant as he asked what was wrong. The bug screamed that it was still useful. It flapped its 6 legs frantically, stammering that it knew where to find stronger aberrations that could produce more abyssal toxin. Aiden's interest was piqued. He asked where. The bug clung to his finger, fawningly explaining that it could lead him to the rift it had crawled out of. But it added that it might be a little difficult. The location was secret and heavily guarded. It had only managed to sneak out by parasitizing 3 different humans in its weakest larval form. It asked if Aiden knew of the Academy for Power Users. Aiden nodded. The bug stated gravely that the rift was inside the campus itself. To get close, they would need a perfect disguise and would have to wait for the right opportunity. Aiden considered this, then suggested they could just wait for the school year to start. The bug was confused. Aiden pointed to an envelope tossed on his nightstand. It was stamped with the Academy's seal. It was an acceptance letter. The term started in about a week. The bug thought that admitting an abyssal dragon into the school was probably a sign that humanity was doomed. Julian pushed a file across the desk, his expression unusually grim. He was right. The abyss was growing restless. Morgan flipped through the report. For some time, reports of abyssal rifts had been appearing with alarming frequency. Julian stated that the appearance of an abyssal species in the Heights could only mean one thing. Morgan closed the file, finishing his thought. A new rift was nearby. Julian confirmed that Morgan had already known. Morgan replied that it wasn't hard to guess, but it would be very difficult to find. He had already dispatched his teams to conduct a citywide search. He told Julian to handle the paperwork. Julian grumbled about being exploited. After Julian left, Morgan was alone again. He picked up the file he had been reviewing earlier. On the first page was a photo of a handsome young man with a shy smile. Below it, a few lines summarized his unremarkable life, with 2 exceptions: a mysterious disappearance and a surprising acceptance into the Academy. Morgan's eyes narrowed, his thoughts hidden behind a cool, impassive mask. A knock came at the door. Vera entered cautiously. She reported that another invitation had arrived from the Academy and asked if she should send the usual letter of refusal. Morgan told her that wouldn't be necessary. Vera was taken aback by the unexpected answer. Morgan set down the file and laced his long, pale fingers together. He stated coolly that he would be attending the opening ceremony this year. In the days leading up to the start of term, Jeeves was busy helping Aiden pack. He methodically placed every item from the list into a suitcase. Then he tried to lift the backpack Aiden had packed himself and nearly stumbled under its immense weight. He asked what on earth Aiden had put in there. Aiden clutched the bag to his chest, stating seriously that they were personal items. Jeeves gave him a suspicious look but didn't press the matter. From Aiden's sleeve, the bug peeked out. It looked at the neatly packed suitcase and felt a sense of absurdity, asking if he was really just going to walk into the Academy like this. Aiden nodded as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, pointing out that he had an acceptance letter. The bug clarified that wasn't what it meant. The Academy's security was notoriously strict. Wasn't he worried? It quickly corrected itself, adding a stream of flattery about how his power would surely make a mockery of their weak security. But it pointed out that their plans could still be hindered, and more importantly, While Aiden's human body would pass, it was still an aberration and would likely be detected. It glanced up and saw the boy lounging lazily with his chin on his backpack, looking completely at ease. The bug realized he must already have a plan. Aiden thought for a moment, then honestly shook his head. He didn't. Just then, the doorbell rang downstairs, an unfamiliar sound. Aiden went down to investigate. Jeeves was standing at the door with a cold expression. A young man who bore a striking resemblance to Arthur Crestwood stood on the doorstep. Jeeves was asking him stiffly what his business was. Ryan stood there with a flawless smile. He had heard that he and his brother were in the same incoming class and had come to say hello. Aiden blinked. He had no idea who this person was. Ryan continued, asking if Aiden was aware of the academy's opening ceremony. He explained that it was actually a large-scale practical assessment that lasted for several days, and class assignments would be based on the results. He added with a subtle, knowing smile that any tricks used to fool a machine might not be so effective in a real combat situation. The butler's expression darkened. Ryan said that to prepare for the assessment, their father had arranged a facility for them to run simulations. He was here to invite his brother to join him. His smile was perfect, his tone friendly and free of any condescension. He said that brothers should look out for each other. Jeeves's frown deepened. He knew his young master's limitations. Though he had passed the initial power test, he had never had any formal training. While Jeeves wanted Aiden to succeed and regain his status, he was more worried about him getting hurt. Just as he was about to politely refuse, a clear voice came from behind him. A simulation? Jeeves turned to see Aiden stepping forward, his expression sincere. He asked if the simulation could replicate the security measures of the entrance exam, specifically the kind that would let him test if he could sneak a facebug inside. Ryan was taken aback by the strange question but replied that it probably could. Aiden's eyes lit up. He agreed readily, saying they should go. The car's interior was silent, gliding forward smoothly. The hybrid power mechanical engine minimized all vibrations, a world away from the vehicle assigned to Aiden. Ryan glanced sideways at the boy next to him. Aiden was staring out the window with rapt attention, as if the mundane streetscape held some profound secret. The play of light and shadow on his fair profile made him look completely harmless. And yet, there was something elusive about him that made Ryan feel strangely uneasy. They soon arrived at their destination. Ryan got out of the car and explained that the aberrations in the Academy's real tests were live, but here in the simulation they were mostly just constructs of power. He assured his brother that he would be perfectly safe. Aiden turned his gaze from the massive building before them and looked at Ryan with confusion, asking if he was calling him brother. He vaguely recalled the human chattering about brotherhood on the way here. Ryan's smile faltered for a second. He took it as a subtle insult. He gritted his teeth and said that if his brother preferred, he wouldn't use the term again. He gestured for Aiden to enter, but added that he would need to have his power level checked again before going inside. There was a strange spherical device by the door, similar to the one at the Academy. Aiden placed his hand on it. The machine lit up, and the large door slid open, revealing a long, narrow corridor. As Aiden's back disappeared down the hallway, Ryan's smile vanished. He stared at the closed door, his expression dark. He had specifically requested this machine. It hadn't been tampered with. While it couldn't measure an upper limit, it was 100% accurate in detecting the presence of power. So it was true. Aiden Crestwood, the legitimate heir, now actually had power. Ryan's face was grim, his lips a thin, hard line. Dark, envious thoughts festered within him. He would not allow what was rightfully his to be taken away. His father's favor, his high status, all of it. He took out his phone and made a call, his voice low and determined as he told the person on the other end to get ready. The corridor opened into a vast, silver-white hall. An operator asked Aiden which part of the exam he wanted to simulate. Aiden blinked, asking if there were multiple parts. The operator confirmed there were: a written test, an interview, and finally the aberration combat practical. Aiden thought for a moment, then asked which part had the security check. The operator was momentarily confused but replied that it was the written test. Aiden decided on that one. The operator, though baffled by someone using an expensive simulation facility for a written exam, complied and left Aiden alone in the hall. The bug crawled out of his sleeve, excited. It pointed to a massive, gray, gate-like structure, chirping that was it. Aiden walked toward it, carrying the bug. But before he could get close, the gate lit up with red lights and blared an alarm. He thought for a moment, then tossed the bug a safe distance away. The gate went silent. The bug, having landed safely, immediately began praising the great Dragon Lord for being undetectable by human technology. But Aiden looked displeased. The fact that the ugly bug was detected while he was classified as a normal human by the trashy machine was insulting. He shot a dark look at the bug, and its flattery died in its throat. He gestured with his chin, telling it to go try. The bug, feeling the phantom heat of a dragon's stare, reluctantly agreed. It tried to sneak past the gate from every conceivable angle, but each time, the alarm went off. It glanced back at Aiden, who had found a chair and was slouched in it, chin propped on his arms, casually telling it to keep trying. If it knew how to get in, it wouldn't be in this mess. Aiden watched its struggles with amusement. It was all very novel to a dragon who hadn't been out in 50,000 years. But eventually, he grew sleepy. He used to sleep for centuries at a time. This human need for only a dozen or so hours of sleep a day was exhausting. He yawned, found a comfortable position, and, to the rhythm of the blaring alarms, drifted off to sleep. On the other side of the door, Ryan grew increasingly agitated. With the surveillance cut, he couldn't see what was happening. He kept reassuring himself that his plan was foolproof. The control source for the aberrations from the gala had never been found, meaning it could have parasitized anyone. Aiden had been the closest. The few surviving aberrations had been carefully raised and maliciously enhanced. They were now mindless killing machines. The entire event could be staged as a tragic accident. The latent egg in the boy's body, activated by the power in the enclosed space, had hatched and destroyed everything, including the video records. But hours had passed. The aberrations should have made quick work of Aiden and broken out by now. The silence was unnerving. Ryan's patience wore thin. He decided to risk it, ordering his subordinate to unlock the door and check inside. The subordinate opened the door, then stumbled back in terror. "Oh, it's open," a voice said. Aiden looked up from where he had been fiddling with the lock. He mentioned he had been wondering how to get out. Ryan was so shocked his face went pale. He managed to force a ghastly smile and asked his brother if everything had gone smoothly. Aiden nodded nonchalantly, yawned, and asked where the car was. He wanted to go home. He was tired. Ryan, stunned into a stiff smile, said the car was waiting. After Aiden had left, Ryan demanded a report. The operator came out, shaking his head in a daze. He told Ryan that there was nothing. The simulation had ended automatically. There were no constructs, no aberrations, no blood, no bodies. The huge metal chamber was empty, clean, and cold, as if nothing had ever happened. Back in his room, Aiden threw himself onto his bed and yawned, his long lashes wet with tears of exhaustion. A deep, soul-crushing weariness was spreading through him. an irresistible pull into slumber. As his eyes closed, a heavy, searing aura emanated from his body. The bug, sensitive to the change, scrambled out of his sleeve and fled to the farthest corner of the room, pressing itself against the wall in terror. It stared at the bed. The boy's face was serene, but a fine layer of metallic scales was shimmering into existence on his skin. It was an eerie, terrifying sight. The very air in the room grew thick and heavy. In another part of the city, Morgan entered his Spartan apartment. He pulled off his gloves and loosened his collar. The room was silent, sterile. Suddenly, he sensed something and looked up. An ancient, elegant silver long sword mounted on the wall was humming faintly, vibrating as if announcing the awakening of some unseen presence. A flicker of something other than his usual cold indifference crossed Morgan's face. He couldn't believe it. What is going on? Julian, a lab coat thrown haphazardly over his shoulders, rushed out of his lab, rubbing his eyes, irritable from lack of sleep. When he saw who was standing there, his drowsiness vanished. It was Morgan, exuding the chill of the night. He checked the time. It wasn't working hours. Morgan entered without an invitation. He placed a long, cloth-wrapped object on the table. He unwrapped it, revealing a silver longsword. The hilt was carved in the shape of a roaring dragon, its wings spread wide, its barbed tail coiling around the blade. Julian gasped in awe. Morgan confirmed it was what he thought. He ran a finger along the blade, his eyes dark and unreadable. Julian, after admiring it, asked why Morgan had brought it here. Shouldn't something like that be locked in a vault? Morgan stated that it had just now shown activity. Julian blinked, then asked tentatively if Morgan was aware that it was a sword. What did activity even mean? Morgan ignored the question and said that Julian had previously mentioned the possibility of the ethereal being a dragon. Julian immediately understood and began to backtrack frantically, insisting it was just a random guess and that ethereals hadn't been seen in millennia. Morgan cut him off, stating that the possibility still existed. Julian conceded the point. Morgan, satisfied, said he was leaving the sword there for study. Julian stared at the priceless, dangerous artifact now sitting on his desk, deeply regretting his earlier joke. As Morgan was leaving, Julian called out to him. He asked hypothetically if an ethereal, a dragon, really did appear, what would he do? Morgan repeated the word dragon, a slight, cold smile touching his lips. It didn't soften his features. Instead, it gave him the sharp, dangerous look of a drawn blade. He said that extinction was their most fitting fate. After that night, Ryan had the simulation chamber searched from top to bottom but found no trace of the aberrations. The most logical explanation was that they had somehow escaped, but a deep sense of unease lingered. The thought that Aiden himself might have killed them and disposed of the bodies was too ridiculous to entertain. Still, the incident made him cautious, and he left Aiden alone. Aiden, meanwhile, was having his own frustrations. He couldn't consciously summon the scales he had apparently manifested in his sleep. He sat on the floor, staring at his plain, human hands in disgust. They were thin, fragile, and pale. Annoyed, he punched the floor and then immediately recoiled, his face scrunching up in pain. The bug, trying to be helpful, reminded him that school started the next day, and once they found the rift, he would be able to. Aiden cut it off, his tough facade cracking as he whimpered that his hand hurt. As a dragon, his scales had protected him from all injury. He had never felt pain before. He was just now realizing that he was terrified of it. The bug fell silent, unable to reconcile the image of the Jiaoqi, Painiverse boy before it with the terrifying killing machine from the simulation chamber. On that day, After dispatching the first few aberrations, Aiden had systematically and brutally dismantled the remaining ones, testing the limits of the detection system by calibrating the exact amount of power left in their dying bodies. He had done it all with a look of innocent, childlike curiosity on his face. It was the most chilling thing the bug had ever witnessed. Suddenly, Aiden looked at the bug with an unreadable expression. He asked if it had said they were going to sneak into the school tomorrow. The bug confirmed this was the plan. Aiden smiled and corrected it. Only the bug was sneaking in. The bug froze in terror, images of the dismembered aberrations flashing in its mind. Aiden assured it not to worry, that he had figured out how to help it. The bug wanted no part of that kind of help. The next day, Jeeves drove Aiden to the student shuttle point, giving him a long, worried lecture on every possible topic. The shuttle, a large, quiet vehicle powered by power, arrived. Aiden's eagerness to board was palpable. Whether from excitement for school or desperation to escape the lecture was unclear. Inside the shuttle, the chatter died as he entered. Everyone stared. Ryan, holding court in the middle of the bus, cheerfully waved, offering Aiden a seat next to him. The seating was unofficially ranked by power level, with the back full and the front nearly empty. No one wanted to be the first target in the upcoming practical exams. Ryan's offer was a double-edged sword. Accepting was arrogant, declining was rude. Aiden ignored him completely and sat in the very first seat at the front of the bus. He then leaned against the window and closed his eyes. A collective, quiet gasp went through the bus. Ryan was frozen in place, stunned. Aiden, dozing off, was oblivious. The bug whispered that the atmosphere felt tense. Aiden, half asleep, murmured that he knew. It was because his clothes were ugly. The butler had confiscated his favorite shiny outfit. The bug sent a silent prayer of thanks to Jeeves. When Aiden woke up, they had arrived. A loud voice announced the start of the first test. The students were led into a large hall, similar to the simulation chamber. As he walked toward the security gate, Aiden took the bug from his sleeve. Having been brutally helped the day before, it knew the drill. It braced for the worst. But Aiden simply held it for a moment, then let it go. The bug was confused. It felt its power had been suppressed to a near undetectable level. Aiden explained that as his familiar, he didn't need to physically dismantle it to control its power. He had only done that before to test the machine's threshold, and because he was curious about abyssal biology. The bug shuddered. Aiden passed through the gate without incident. He sat down and stared at the test paper, then fell into a long, profound silence. Amidst the scratching of pens, he whispered to the bug, asking if it could read human writing. The bug said it could. Aiden replied miserably that he couldn't. The written exam was torture. After it was over, Aiden felt more exhausted than if he had fought a dozen aberrations. The students were led to their dorms. The rooms were doubles with a shared living space but private bedrooms. Aiden was thrilled to see his luggage waiting for him, his heart sinking when he realized both his suitcase and backpack felt far too light. All his snacks and all his carefully selected shiny treasures were gone. A note on the table explained that all contraband items had been confiscated and sent home. He was on the verge of tears when the door opened. A brown-haired boy entered, introducing himself as Leo, his new roommate. He recognized the famous Aiden Crestwood and, seeing his dejected state, assumed he had failed the exam. Taking pity on him, Leo offered to share the dinner he'd brought from the dining hall. Aiden's eyes lit up. He said he hadn't eaten. 10 minutes later, Leo stared in shock at a stack of empty plates. He hadn't gotten a single bite. He looked at Aiden's slender frame, unable to comprehend where all the food had gone. Aiden, still looking hungry, asked if there was any more. Leo stammered that there wasn't. Aiden sighed but thanked him sincerely, telling him he was a very good human. Then, his earlier sadness completely forgotten, he happily dragged his two enormous, now empty bags into his room. 3 days later, the results of the written exam were in. The proctors were discussing the scores. One mentioned that there was a student who had scored a perfect 0. They couldn't believe it was possible to get every single question wrong, including multiple choice. The proctor revealed it was Aiden Crestwood, and the other nodded in understanding. Just then, another staff member burst in, breathlessly announcing that a student had solved the bonus question. An infamously difficult problem written in a lost ancient language that no one had ever answered before. Answering it correctly would guarantee the top score in the class, possibly in the Academy's history. The proctor eagerly asked who the prodigy was. The staff member checked his notes and announced the name, Aiden Crestwood. The proctors were now in an even bigger predicament. The bonus question provided a 200% score multiplier. But Aiden's base score was 0, and 0 multiplied by anything was still 0. Aiden wandered the campus, which he found rather ugly. He preferred things that were shiny. The bug, sensing his mood, tried to distract him. Suddenly, it yelped that it had sensed the location of the abyssal rift. It was far, but if they headed east. As Aiden turned, he ran into a group of students. They blocked his path, their faces radiating malice. The leader sneered, asking how Aiden had managed to sneak into the academy. They taunted him about the malfunctioning test equipment and warned him that people got hurt or even disappeared during the practical exams. One of them reached out to grab him. Just as he did, Aiden looked up. His eyes were devoid of emotion, but there was something in his gaze that sent a chill down the boy's spine. His hand froze in midair. The bug, hidden in Aiden's sleeve, frantically communicated with him, begging him not to cause a scene. Aiden complained that they were noisy and he wanted to burn them. The bug reasoned with him, reminding him of their mission to find the rift. Aiden sighed and reluctantly agreed. As soon as his gaze shifted, the fear gripping the bully vanished. Enraged at his own momentary weakness, he lunged for Aiden's collar. A cool, indifferent voice cut through the air, asking if there was a problem. The sound was like shattering ice. It was a familiar voice. Aiden looked past the bully and his eyes widened slightly. It was the human with the shiny hair and eyes. Morgan sat in the back of his car. He had finally accepted the Academy's invitation, not for the ceremony, but for a classified DAC mission. As the car moved silently through the campus, he glanced out the window and saw a group of students cornering a smaller boy. The boy's thin shoulders and fluffy hair looked familiar. Morgan ordered the driver to stop, then to drive over. The window lowered, revealing his face. The bullies went pale. They stammered that there was no problem and fled. Morgan turned his attention to the boy, who was staring at him. He told him to get in the car. The bug was having a silent panic attack. It knew of Morgan's reputation, his almost supernatural intuition. It prayed for Aiden to make an excuse and leave. Aiden immediately agreed and got into the car, sitting right next to Morgan. The car started moving. Morgan asked for an address. The sunlight caught his silver hair, making it gleam. Aiden, slightly mesmerized, just hummed in response. Morgan patiently repeated that he needed his dorm's address. Aiden said he wasn't going back to his dorm. He then asked if they could drop him off right where he had gotten on. After all, the rift was probably somewhere nearby. Morgan, clearly not expecting this answer, turned to look at the boy beside him. It was the first time he had seen him clearly in the daylight. The boy was slim, with soft features and large, dark, innocent eyes. A completely harmless appearance. Morgan's brow furrowed slightly. Despite the clear results of the scanner and the boy's meticulously documented history, something felt profoundly wrong.